Welcome, low ego action heroes. This is Debbie Levitt from DeltaCX.com. We're a full service CX and UX consultancy, and we are taking a tremendous diversion away from what we normally talk about on this show today. Normally, our Friday show is practicing critical thinking, and you send in wacky LinkedIn posts and goofy tweets and wacky TikTok videos, and we break them down and we take a critical thinking look at these things and what are they really saying? What is this for? Is it meaningful, actionable, helpful? And what are possible outcomes? But I thought today that if we really want to practice our critical thinking just for once, because I don't plan to make this a particular habit, we should probably dive into a little bit more of a hot topic. Hello, Pier Mario, and thank you for helping us remove any porn spam from the YouTube channel. So I want to just give everybody a warning. We're not going to talk about CX and UX today. We're going to talk about a topic that some might be interested to talk about and some might not want to think about right now. We're going to practice critical thinking about the recent news from America around a change in laws relating to abortions. Now, I'm not here to pass any judgment on are abortions good or bad, or should you have one or not have one. That's not what critical thinking is about. This is about critical thinking about the changing laws in America. What do these changing laws mean? What are possible outcomes? What are questions we should be asking? And what might happen next? And very often in UX work, you'll hear someone say, we can use 5 whys to get to a root cause. Why? 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 Today we'll be asking a lot of why. And I hope everybody joining live in the audience will comment and ask questions as we go. As we ask why, tell us what you think could be the possible answers. Ask your why. Ask your questions. It's critical thinking time. And critical thinking requires us to step away from what we believe or what we prefer or what we would choose for ourselves. We have to look at these things without emotion or judgment and just ask some tough questions. So to help me navigate these waters, I'm happy to bring back a favorite guest here today, Dr. Seth Finkel, who is a psychologist. And I wanted to have, yes, he's a white guy, but I wanted to have a psychologist help us navigate these tough waters because this is certainly a fresh topic for us. So Seth, please introduce yourself and let people know more about who you are.
Hi, I'm Seth Finkel. I'm a white guy. Now I am a white guy, and I'm cisgendered and I'm heterosexual. There's a lot of things about me that place me in the wrong place to be having conversations about these sorts of issues. But here I am. I'm a clinical and school psychologist working in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania in the United States, and I also do some adjunct teaching at the college level, and I like to think about complex, difficult topics in as neutral and non-emotional a way as I possibly can. So that's what I'm here doing. I am not representing an area of expertise for myself. Real quick, as a disclaimer, I'm not an attorney. I'm not a medical practitioner. I don't have a uterus. I'm not fertile. There's a variety of reasons why I have zero expertise in this area, but I'm a concerned human, as I think a lot of us are, and so I'm happy to represent that group.
Yeah, thanks. And again, I didn't bring you on for your uterosity. I just brought you on for, the ability that I think great psychologists have to be neutral even in times of stress and upset and change. So that was why I thought of you, and you're a favorite guest. So I'd like to fill in our audience a little bit on what happened in America, because we do have a very international audience. Hello, Lila. Hello, Abdul Bazit. And to everybody else joining. And I just want to talk a little bit about what happened in America, since in some cases we've mentioned this to people and they said, what happened in America? And hey, I don't blame you. I don't want to pay attention to it either. But here's the short version. In the USA, a law was recently overturned, and that law allowed abortions to be safe and legal. So again, trigger warning, we're going to be talking about things related to abortions today, even though we're not going to try to sway anybody in any direction, just critical thinking. The Supreme Court decided, so the Supreme Court of America decided that each state in America should make their own laws about abortion rather than the national federal government saying, hey, we're going to say it's okay for this to be safe and legal. So this means that abortion will probably be safe and legal in some states, and in other U.S. states, women will not have access to safe abortions. And we're also finding that in some of these states, if someone believes that a woman has purposefully terminated a pregnancy, even through miscarriage or something like that, it could be a crime. That means these people could get arrested. They could end up in jail. And there are already cases in America where women who were suspected of causing their miscarriages or causing their stillbirths were arrested. Authorities went through their phones, their browser histories, and more to try to prove that they purposefully terminated their pregnancy. So that means this topic becomes about so much more than an individual's personal choice to continue a pregnancy or not. It opens up more critical thinking questions really about technology and technology ethics. For example, some people are concerned that apps that track women's periods will have their data used in cases like these. And of course, we've seen some companies announce, oh, we'll reimburse you if you have to travel to another state to have an abortion. And some companies claim they'll move you to these states. But again, there's so many angles to this, and we're just scratching the surface here, but we want to ask some critical thinking questions because this one single legal decision in America has a lot of implications and consequences, which makes it a good, albeit slightly uncomfortable, topic for critical thinking. I've got a critical thinking question starter because probably everyone's a little nervous here, but here's my first question, and I'm curious what Seth thinks. Seth, why would a country that's had a law in place for 50 years all of a sudden say, you know what, we should take a look at this 50-year-old law and throw it out?
Yeah, that's a real good critical thinking question. There's a lot of opinions and ideas being kicked around about this very question as we speak. I will challenge a few of the just to be doing some critical thinking before we even start to unpack answer the question. Let's unpack the question. So, all of a sudden, there's nothing sudden about this.
Okay,
this
that's
was
fair.
a controversial. This was a controversial Supreme Court case when it happened, and almost immediately afterwards, there were a number of legal maneuvers that were put in place, and things that have been placed to start to challenge some of the assumptions about the Supreme Court's decision when Roe v. Wade, the legal case that we're talking about, was originally decided before it was overturned. So 50 years ago, one of the things that had happened was the language said that there would be no undue burden placed upon women who were attempting to have an abortion, to terminate a pregnancy. And undue burden was never very well defined by the Supreme Court. And so for 50 years, there's been a number of instances of people sort of testing the waters to see how much burden is undue. Is transvaginal ultrasound, which has very little actual medical purpose, but it's incredibly intrusive and invasive and uncomfortable. Is that an undue burden or not? Is parental notification an undue burden or not? And these are things that have been tested out by various states for 50 years. So this is nothing. It's nothing new. Why would someone want to do it? I mean, we can certainly kick that around. I suspect a lot of people have a lot of ideas about that. Certainly, religious beliefs play into this to some extent. Morality, ideas about the morals and ethics of voluntary termination of pregnancy. There's discussion about the intersection with race and class, and we know that those are topics that are relevant to this. So there's a lot of potential reasons why it's a big, but I think ultimately for a lot of people it comes down to American politics, and American politics is, I think, a hotter topic in the U.S. and to Americans than World Cup soccer is to, or football is to folks outside of the U.S. This is a spectator sport. It's a very big deal, and there's a lot of money and there's a lot of pride wrapped up in, and sort of team is wrapped up in this. So I think there's a lot of reasons why this has become the issue that a lot of folks have decided they would build their castles on.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think I want to jump back to something I said before because obviously we're a channel that talks a lot about technology. And even though there's only, some connection between abortion or abortion rights and technology, I think I want to jump back to that question
Mm-hmm.
because certainly my LinkedIn has been flooded for days about with comments about what people should be thinking about with respect to their data. Because as we mentioned, there exists in America the possibility that some states will not only make abortion illegal and a crime, but even if you went to another state and did it legally and came back, you could be arrested for murder. They could find
Mm-hmm.
your browser history or a proof that you paid an abortion doctor or clinic or facility. And so this starts getting into areas about privacy and does technology work for or against us? And I jotted down a whole list of questions and ideas I had around this. But before I jump into them, was there anything you were thinking or critical thinking questions you had related to how technology plays into this?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been reading the same stuff you have, I suspect. A lot of this has just gone absolutely viral. And this information and all of these discussions and things have kind of exploded over the last week, certainly in my world. Um, this is certainly a bigger topic in your domain than in mine, but it's a topic that's relevant to my professional life as well. The question of what information should be private, who should have access to that information, to what extent is that information actionable. Um, that's stuff that I deal with every day in my line of work as well. Um, and certainly from a tech perspective, we know that there's huge amounts of data, and data is big business at this point. And companies like, we can name Meta as one who's putting out um, all kinds of things about, we're on the side of women. We're going to fund people's trips to go to abortion friendly states to terminate pregnancy and so forth. And we also know that's a very thin layer of icing on a generally speaking not super friendly cake when it comes to this stuff. So and they hold a ton of information. People are posting things all the time without really thinking about the implications. And I mean, I have people in my intimate world who keep track of their menstrual cycles on apps. Um, do we trust? And I think a lot of this comes down to faith in companies and how companies work with data. Do we trust that that data is going to be utilized properly, and can it be hacked, and how secure is that data, and what are the intents of those companies? It's those are my big questions. Is what's driving some of the concerns right now, and are people being paranoid about this, or is this a legitimate area of concern?
Yeah, and I think the first thing that comes to those are all great. The first thing that comes to mind for me is they say that location data is now so specific that when you're in the supermarket, your phone knows what aisle you're in, and so you might end up getting ads for breakfast cereals because your phone knew you're in the breakfast cereal aisle. So we have questions about geolocation. And hi, Shri and Charlene. And so we have questions about geolocation. Will do our apps and phones and systems know where we are and what happens with that data? What about what was I just thinking? Oh gosh, I lost my own train of thought because I was saying hi to everybody. I'm so bad.
Well,
It's
I'll throw
Friday.
one in at you as well. This is one that people talk about all the time. We talk about it in my family incessantly at this point, which is: are your devices listening to you?
Yes,
Are they
that's what I was
listening
going
for
to say.
keywords?
Yeah, so we've got an
Go for it.
Airbnb guest right now, and he's allergic to almonds. So I've been discussing almonds in both English and Italian because he's British, and but I'm speaking Italian here in Italy. Now I didn't Google almonds, I didn't buy almonds, I didn't do anything other than talk about almonds. And in Instagram, I've been getting almond ads. I've been getting
Mhm.
ads for almonds and almond milk. And someone said to me, well, maybe it's because his geolocation now shows that he's near you, and maybe some system knows he has an almond issue. And I said, well, then why isn't it sending me rice milk? Why is it sending me the things he's allergic to? It's got to be that it heard me talking about almonds, didn't quite get the context, and is showing me almond ads. So I definitely, people keep saying, oh, no, they're not listening to you. It's just a bunch of coincidences. And I say, well, wow.
It is a wow, and I take no chances on this. And so first of all, I routinely, because I'm not sure that this isn't an AI thing and that my devices actually have become sentient. So I always talk about how much I love technology around my tech, just so that when the machines take over, they kill me last. But I also routinely talk about wanting to know tomorrow's winning lottery numbers in hopes that eventually that will just pop up in my feed. It hasn't yet, but I got to keep trying.
This sounds like a time travel thing from the new Star One album, but that's a topic for another day. So there have been discussions about location. I mean, I think, and then I was also talking about phone numbers. We text people, we call people. Now, I use an app called Burner, and that's not sponsored. They didn't pay me, I pay them. I think it's called Burner app. It might be only available in America. I don't know about other countries, but you can basically get burner phone numbers. The way people used to buy burner phones, you can get burner phone number. You have a phone number for a few weeks, then it goes away. I've used that for like selling my car and putting ads on Craigslist or online ads where I didn't want people to have my real phone number and hound me to the ends of the earth. And so, I think everybody's going to have to start to imagine that there's some sort of international spy.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't like to make tech predictions because I'm inevitably incorrect, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone were able to track this sort of information, if increased traffic on the deep web sort of results from some of the things that are going to be coming down in the US. And by things, plural, I'm talking about both this overturning of Roe v. Wade, but also the Supreme Court has, this week they've been very busy. They've had lots of things that they're putting into place that are changing the landscape of American politics and the American judicial world, and that's a world that hasn't really budged much in any big direction in the last probably certainly number of decades, my lifetime, your lifetime. Um, and as a lot of people have somewhat virally been talking about lately, when the decision was made to overturn Roe v. Wade, Justice Clarence Thomas also indicated, he kind of telegraphed three other cases that he was very interested in taking a look at. And we know that the makeup of the Supreme Court politically has changed demonstrably over the last handful of years, which is the why now question. Some of those cases have the potential to influence massive legal and social change here nationally within the US and maybe internationally as well. Um, and we know that stuff is coming down the pike. So far, the US Supreme Court has been making good on a number of long-standing promises to look at some cases. So we know that there's a lot of things that are kind of in flux right now, and they're likely to continue to change. And again, as that happens, I think a lot of conversation is going to be going underground certainly within the U.S. I think there's going to be a lot of, I'm guesstimating platforms and sort of front ends to be able to utilize, besides say a Tor browser, things a little more user friendly for people to start communicating on the DL for the time being.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in on that because about 6 years ago, I started telling my friends, like, I predict in the future that a lot of our information is going to be used against us. I think that Facebook is not our buddy, and some of these other chat systems and whatever are not our buddy. And this stuff is not, even when they say end to end encryption, I don't totally always trust that, depending upon who it is and what they're claiming. And at the time, I said to everybody, look, I think I found a system that is the most locked down system I've ever seen in my life. And I want everybody to please download what at the time was called Semaphore by a company called Spider Oak. Again, not sponsored. I pay them. They don't pay me. I use Spider Oak for my computer backup, and I've been using it for about 10 years. And the cool thing about Spider Oak is they also back up external drives, and it was something like Dropbox and other things didn't do. So I've been a paying customer of theirs for some time, and I'm happy with them. But they came out with something called Semaphore, which they've now bizarrely renamed to Crossclave. Not exactly the catchiest name, but basically, Crossclave answers the question of what if I wanted Slack or private messaging and I wanted nobody on the planet to have any possible access to it ever, for it to be not subpoenaable, for there to be no records of it. And if you read some of their terms, they say, like, if we're ever subpoenaed, we can only tell them you have an account. And I think that we're going to see people say, oh, you should get on Signal. Oh, and I'm on Telegram because I don't like Signal. But honestly, the reason I don't like Signal, now Telegram does the same thing. So I didn't like Signal, and Telegram does the same thing, even though I'm on it. And that is, because they have access to your contacts, they say, like, hey, we know Seth is in your phone book. Looks like Seth just joined Telegram. Why don't you contact him? And when I signed up for Signal, everyone said to me, oh, it's so private. No one's going to know you're whatever, bop, boop, bop, and beep. And as soon as I signed up, I had friends messaging me like, hey, Debbie, you're on Signal. And I was like, what the F? I thought this was supposed to be private and locked down and this whole thing. And so the interesting thing about something like Crossclave is that because it's kind of a high security Slack replacement, it is invite only. If you don't invite people to your little private message or Slack universe, they don't know you're in Crossclave. And so it's not like Signal. It's not like that. In fact, I got a message on Telegram the other day, and it said, because I had a burner phone number. I had a burner phone number for a business idea I was playing with about 6 years ago. The business idea tanked, and I let the phone number go. Looks like somebody just started using the phone number, because I got this message on Telegram saying, hey, this phone number that's in your contacts, which still had my business name on it, hey, they're on Telegram, start a conversation. And my thought was, oh my God, remember that phone number and that business idea? That was 5 whatever years ago. So I'm talking everybody's heads off. We have a very quiet room today. I know this is a tough topic for people, and they're expecting me to tell stories about helicopters and bad tweets. But, we are talking about something deeper today. What do all of you think who are watching live? What are some of your critical thinking questions? What are your thoughts on this stuff? Seth, what else? I've got a list of technology things I think we're going to have to reconsider, but what do you think about private messaging and tech?
It's interesting. My one of my kids and I were having a conversation last night, and we did a little thought experiment, which was kind of fun. And it was, what if, and it partly stemmed from using, I'm trying to remember which app it was. It was one of the payment apps. It was probably Venmo.
Okay.
One of many. And I'm always intrigued by the information I get about my friends and what they're doing and how they're spending money, because for whatever the reason, I still find it a very strange business model choice. They
It's
just
got
put
like a
all that out
feed.
there on Venmo. Yeah, I get a feed on who's spending what on what, um, which sometimes I really don't want to know. Sometimes it's stuff I really, really don't want to know, and they're very honest because a lot of people our age, there's Gen Xers and baby boomers who aren't necessarily savvy to the idea that this stuff is going to be everywhere, um,
Right.
and so the question was, and let me also state here that I know absolutely nothing about blockchain technology.
Right.
I think that's an important disclaimer to make. I literally know zero about it.
I'm with
Um,
you.
However, the one thing that I've been told by people who know a lot about blockchain technology is, again, from first principles, it's kind of designed so that everybody has all the information simultaneously within a blockchain. Like, you can't do anything without everyone instantly getting a copy of that information. So my thinking was, what would happen if all messaging apps were 100% transparent and everything you said was transmittable to everyone else who utilizes that app? I have a funny feeling there'd be a lot less people having really important conversations. Um, but theoretically, if you had either 100% transparency or 0% transparency, it's not such a horrible thing for the end user, assuming they know the rules. It's where you get into this mid range where there's enough transparency that they can see what you're doing, but you can't see what they're doing. That's I think where it becomes somewhat problematic. And I'm not someone who trusts platforms very easily. I don't trust corporations very effectively. Anyone with a profit motive, my suspicion is that that's their primary motive. And if they can use my data, my assumption is that they will probably use my data because it's not super regulated. Um, so I'm intrigued by all of this. I tend to be really, as I'm facetious about what I say in front of my phone and my other devices and so forth, but I'm also kind of serious. I am really careful what I say in front of live devices at this point. I have turned off everything that I have the understanding of how to turn off, and I check my privacy settings kind of um, compulsively because I know that they change constantly and that things default to not being private. And so I'm regularly double checking on the security of my data and my information. Um, it's interesting how discussions of abortions become discussions of um, and reproductive rights become discussions of data security. But I think honestly that is a primary consideration right now, in certainly in the U.S. and I think internationally it should be a concern that everybody has: is what are people doing with your data? Because we're not just talking about our date of birth and uh, our gross income and where we happen to be standing at the moment. We're talking about almost everything that anyone could possibly know about you, and a number of things that it can presume using some pretty smart algorithms about us. I was stunned when I downloaded all of my stuff from Facebook a couple
Oh,
years ago.
right.
Stunned by the amount of information that it had about me, including things I've never put out there, but it just assumed using some pretty clever methodologies, and it was pretty spot on. So it's I don't know whether or not we should be alarmed by it, but I'm alarmed by it anyway.
Yeah, so I think we're going to have to think about extremely private messaging systems. Again, I don't understand security and cybersecurity. I'm no expert. I think Spider Oak Crossclave is a good choice, but what do I know? It seems like, something we have to really research and get more serious about reading terms and conditions. And I'm also seeing in my LinkedIn universe people saying, hey, look, no matter what your opinion is about crypto, these transactions were designed to be untraceable. So if you think you want to have an abortion or something else that ends up becoming illegal or controversial, and you don't want that payment traced back to you, because let's face it, they can trace back everything we've spent money on other than handing someone cash in your own home where there's no security camera on you. Will it make sense for people, even who don't think of themselves as the crypto bros, to get into some sort of cryptocurrency just to be able to make untraceable private payments?
Yeah. You've been sort of hoping for people to comment and throw some stuff in the chat, and I'll do that as well. I'm really intrigued by because it's an opportunity for me. I'm not usually around an international group of folks, and I know that you've got people representing a variety of different countries of origin and current countries of residence. Beyond the issue of female reproduction and human reproduction, I keep saying female. It's really a human reproduction issue. This is not a women's issue. This is a human issue. But beyond that issue, just to the question of cybersecurity and of kind of Big Brother watching you, and of knowing that governments have different policies on a variety of different kinds of activities that we can engage in that are potentially trackable using tech. I'm wondering whether people might have some experiences with that they might be able to safely share, and some either stories about I know a friend who, or some workarounds, or just issues that are coming up, because frankly the US is a little behind some other countries right now in terms of this level of government regulation, and it's going to be a change for a lot of us, and I'm looking to people who have already experienced some of this and might have some insights to share based on what's been going on in their world while the US has been quietly sitting in Roe v. Wadeville for the last 50 years.
Yeah, that's a great point. There are certainly other countries who face their own versions of fears about what I believe is not something I want the government to find out about, or the conversations I'm having are not something that the government can find out about. And I don't know what they or people they know have done, or if they're comfortable sharing that. But another thing I had on my list of technology that we have to worry about or think more critically about is when Facebook bought Giphy a couple of years ago. At the time, everyone was like, oh, wow, isn't this great? Now it's going to be so much easier to put wacky ass GIFs into your Facebook and Facebook Messenger and whatever. And I wrote an article, it's out there. I wrote an article immediately after this happened, and I said, that is not why Facebook bought Giphy. Do not buy the propaganda. They bought it because as a keyboard, it can read everything you're typing. So for example, if you install Giphy into a Slack workspace, usually we think of a Slack workspace as a kind of a closed community. Only the people in the Slack workspace can see what each other has typed. But I wrote to Giphy at the time and I said, if someone installs this keyboard or Giphy into a Slack workspace, don't your terms and conditions say that you can read everything that's being written? Because I mean, you know where I'm going with this. And so if we have these things installed in our chat systems or apps or on our phone, isn't Facebook ultimately reading every word you type to people in every app or system you have, even outside of Facebook? I could type something to somebody in Telegram, but if I have Giphy installed, didn't Facebook just see what I typed?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think so. That's the most, and do I want the most unethical company on the planet to know everything I'm typing to people in text messages and stuff they have nothing to do with?
Yeah, that's a big claim. And since we're talking about critical thinking, can you back up the idea that they are in fact the most unethical company on the planet?
Yeah, that is tough. There could be more unethical companies than they are. So let's just say you're right. Let's say they are among the elite when it comes to lack of ethics.
They're among us, and we should eject them from the ship.
Very good, very good. Are the kids still playing that game?
No, I don't know that anyone is still playing the game, although it's a shame because I think it's a really fun game. Again, not a sponsor, but love the game. Always thought it was a lot of fun. So I
Yeah, on
think
a
I'm predicting that it'll be on a futuristic platform embedded into our bodies in another 35 to 40 years, and everyone will be playing it that way. Again, no one listens to my tech predictions, but we'll
That's
see.
yeah, you have got the dystopia future. Oh, Charlene says I still play that game sometimes. Okay, so look for
All
Charlene
right.
there. There you go.
I will, yeah. Time to host a game.
There you go. Let's get a low ego action heroes among us game going. I can't do it because I don't lie. And so it's a terrible game for
Mhm.
me because I refuse to lie. So that's not the right game for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to veer into another topic that is worth the critical thinking and some very tough questions that we do need to ask related to this topic. And that is, in this time of questions about abortions and abortions being safe or unsafe or whatever it might be, many of us are looking at some of the companies, for lack of a better word, that provide healthcare services to women. We're thinking about clinics, we're thinking about hospitals, we're thinking about private practices, and we are thinking about, in America, a company or organization called Planned Parenthood, which is an organization that does provide abortion services, but also provides reproductive related care for women, usually at a more affordable price. And, but here's where it gets a little bit dodgy. Planned Parenthood, for whatever good or evil we think they're doing now, has a very dark past, a very ugly past, in that its original founder, for lack of a better word, believed in reducing undesirable populations. And Seth, I think you looked into this a little bit more than I did. Well, not to take up the whole rest of the show with it, but what's a few things that you've learned about that history?
Yeah, this is quite the rabbit hole. I actually started digging and discovered I had spent hours. This is one of those places where you can really get into it, and frankly I recommend people do because it's a really interesting and thought provoking topic. So in short, this is what I know. And again, big disclaimer that this is literally just a random person just Googling stuff. So this is not something that I've done any kind of intensive work on. But I do know a little bit about eugenics from the history of my field, which also has a bit of a dark past. Psychology has at times associated itself with the so-called eugenics movement, just as Margaret Sanger, the founder of the American birth control movement and later the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, associated herself with as well. Um, Most of the issues around Planned Parenthood have to do with this one individual, this one person who started this organization. Um, and Sanger's work um, definitely helped start the movement for reproductive rights and the invention of the birth control pill and the reversal of state laws that prohibited the publication and distributing of printed materials about sex and sexuality and contraception and human reproduction. And she also believed in eugenics, which is a pretty inherently, even by Planned Parenthood's own statement, inherently racist and ableist ideology. People largely talk about the race implications, but there's also an issue of ableism as well. Um, and it basically said that certain people were unfit to have children as a philosophy. And Sanger um, was so intent, per Planned Parenthood's sort of take on this history. She was so intent on her mission to push for birth control and reproductive rights that she made a choice to make a kind of a deal with the devil, as it were. She associated herself with what at the time in American society and culture seemed like reasonable common ground, which was a movement that had a fair amount of kind of force behind it, and that was this eugenics movement. Um, the harm that she did when she made that choice to Black folks and Latinx people and indigenous people in the US and people with disabilities and the poor and immigrants, it was clearly devastating and still has ripple effects to this day. So, can we say that Margaret Sanger was above reproach? Heck no. She made giant mistakes, and those giant mistakes are actually within the last couple of years being acknowledged by Planned Parenthood as an organization, which I'm not sure, but the last I checked, so it's maybe going back a year or two, they had an interim um, uh, executive director who was a person of color, a woman of color. So I know that they're acutely aware of this. I don't believe that they have a racist agenda at present. Um, but it's a really complicated topic because the question of why are, so the, couple stats. One in roughly, at this point, a well publicized stat is that roughly about 1 in 4 American adult women have had an abortion. 1 in 4. That's a stunning number when you think about it. Something no one talks about. There's a huge amount of shame and stigma associated with this, and so no one talks about this. So no one would even begin to estimate that that number is correct, but it is. It's pretty widely publicized at this point. But roughly about half of the women who have had abortions in the U.S. Are among people with low incomes, and specifically communities of color. So it's easy for someone to draw a bright line and say there's a distinction between Margaret Sanger having these kind of inherently racist roots and Planned Parenthood attempting to exterminate the Black population in the United States, for example. That's something I've heard as an accusation. The other side of it, just another stat that I feel is important to throw out there, that while 1 in 4 women in the U.S. have had abortions, although it's secret, it's invisible, a recent study estimates that at least 1 in 5 men have impregnated someone who's had an abortion. And it's likely that that's actually an underestimate, partly because of shame and sociocultural bias and just simply being unaware of the pregnancies that they've caused and whether those pregnancies have ended in abortion. So these are just the people who are aware of it and willing to report it. But at least 1 in 5 U.S. adult males have contributed to a pregnancy, caused a pregnancy that has resulted in an abortion. So these are fairly big numbers. There's a lot to talk about in all of this, and absolutely it's complex. And so the question of, is abortion inherently racist? Is Planned Parenthood racist? I've heard the flip side, which is that safe and legal abortions have actually provided a much greater range of opportunities for women of color to be able to have higher incomes, to be able to have more opportunities in academia, in the work world. So these are all big, complex issues that require a ton to unpack them. And unfortunately, they're so inflammatory. They're so emotional because we're dealing with the intersectionality of race and culture and gender and abortion and religion and everything. I mean, they're issues that are hot issues, and everyone has something that resonates with them about it. So, like I said, it's a deep rabbit hole, and it's one that I think, if I've learned anything at all, it's that it's much too complex to boil it down to a tweet. It's not as nearly as reductionistic as people would like it to be.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've seen so many interesting conversations on LinkedIn. Like one person, we had the CEO of Duolingo said, if Pennsylvania makes abortion legal, I'm going to grow my company in some other state. And then someone else commented, like, well, does that mean you don't want to hire conservatives? Like, does that mean, like, why? Because the CEO said, oh, I won't be able to hire the talent that I want. And I think when he said that, a lot of people were like, okay, so you're anti-conservatives, or you're anti people who aren't for abortion or aren't pro-choice. And I understand what the guy was trying to say, that for some populations, they won't want to live or move into a state where abortion is a crime. I get that. But I think he said it very clumsily. I think he would have to say that I won't be able to find some of the talent I'll be looking for, because he will find some of the talent he's looking for, even if people leave the state.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting to me. Really, over the last 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, the era of social media, ESM, uh, the number of sound bites that things get reduced to, and how very wordsmithy we get. We can become incredibly semantic and really focus on the finely grained details of things. Um, this is one thing that I'm very sensitive to in any communication, any email I've ever written, frankly, in the last 15 years. Every post I've ever had on social media, um, I try to be extra. Maybe I'm overthinking, but I try to be extra cautious, because I understand that at some point someone can look at something that was awkwardly or unfortunately worded on my part, infer something from it that I absolutely never intended, and use that, in fact, in a way that's incredibly devastatingly bad. And I think this is a great example of that. Is that there's a lot of people who have. I mean, we the United States had uh, a president who fairly famously spent a lot of time on Twitter, and for better or for worse, it was an immediate dump of thought to text to world. Um, and I think that there's pros and cons to that, but one of the obvious cons is when you are someone who has a high level of responsibility or high level of visibility, um, people are going to hang on the specific wording that you use. They're going to judge you and evaluate you based on the way in which you communicate. And I think people have become very aware of this. The whole notion of someone working as the social media manager for a company, for a brand, and people being concerned about the language that's used in branding. This is very much, as I understand it, kind of uh, UX, specifically CX kind of domain, is how do we say things, and what's the purpose of saying things in that way? And if you get the wording slightly wrong, is it going to actually do the opposite of what you want it to do? And how do you stop that from happening when, in fact, you can't always predict that something's going to just age poorly, or that it's going to land wrong, or that people are going to feel some kind of way about it?
Yeah, I want to jump in on that because I saw an ad recently, and the ad said something like, I'm paraphrasing, it doesn't matter if you love men or women.
Right.
And this company thought that they were being progressive and diverse. And my thought was, I think they just alienated the audience they thought they were going for, because this implies that there's only men and women.
Exactly. And thank you so much for that, because I've been waiting for my moment, and this is my moment. So um, almost every single voice I've heard out there um, talking about abortion and reproductive rights. I'm hearing it's talking about women's reproductive rights, and in fact, what we're talking about are human reproductive rights. And I say this as the parent of someone transgender. That in fact, um, I have a son who is, to my understanding, fertile and has a uterus. And I grant that for a lot of folks, that's a lot to wrap your head around, but it's also the case. So it's not, he doesn't identify as a woman. He is a man who is affected by this situation. And there's more than a few people who are finding themselves in a weird place. Again, intersectionality, the issue of gender, and gender identity, and cis versus transgender, and reproductive rights. Every time I hear about women's reproductive rights, I realize that's another, like, the trans community is listening, and they're hearing that, and they're hearing what they're perceiving as rejection from the conversation. So I agree with you. I think it's really easy for people to have these kind of slips, these faux pas that then result um, in trouble. I just the other day was hearing about, I guess, Lizzo, the musician, had a lyric that she didn't realize landed very wrong,
It was
and
ableist.
her take on it was to apologize and
And
to
re-record the
make
song.
that change.
Yeah.
Right, and that's a huge move. It is and it isn't. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not the same as passing a law, but it's a recognition that what you've done was to alienate a group of people and to try to make it right. And can we please everyone all the time? We probably can't. But if you know that you've ostracized or alienated or done harm to a particular community, and you care about that community, I think part of corporate ethics is a recognition that they need to be mindful of that, and even if it costs them some cash or some human capital, you gotta do right.
Yeah, and I know that we just have less than 10 minutes left. And thanks to everybody watching. I see our numbers going up, but nobody's saying anything. So I know this is a bit of a tough topic, but if you want to contribute to it, we would love to hear what you have to say. I think I want to maybe end a little bit with the slippery slope, because to me, part of critical thinking is asking myself, what's happening right now? What what will definitely happen next? What might happen next? What could happen next? And that gets into a little bit of what people might call futurism, or trying to predict things. I think of it as an important part of CX and UX work, which is considering possible outcomes for stuff. And so when we think about specifically the changes in America, both the law issue, and that the Supreme Court has signaled that they might want to overturn or undo some other laws, and they specifically named gay marriage, and they specifically named, I think, contraceptives, availability of
Mm-hmm.
contraceptives. And so we think about the slippery slope. And if nobody's heard that term before, you can Google slippery slope. It's a pretty common term, because sometimes it's used for wacky crap, and sometimes it's used appropriately. Like my wacky crap example would be when I remember in America when they were trying to get gay marriage passed and to make it part of the law, because to me it's just marriage anyway. But when they tried to make it part of the law, people were like, oh, yeah, well, if you let men marry men, then people are going to marry toasters and turtles and trees. And that's a
Right.
typical example of slippery slope. Like, oh, my God, if we allow this, oh, my God, this is what could happen next. And sometimes it's quite inflammatory. So we have to make sure we're using critical thinking so that we don't end up in that strange inflammatory place. We've got a comment from Linda, friend of the show. She says, Dr. Seth, thanks for the comment about ethics and stating the responsibility to make things right. My company has an ethics group, and I'm going to share that.
I love that. That's awesome to hear. I would love to see corporate the corporate world wrap their arms around the idea of doing right to humans, and to the planet. I think that would be kind of amazing. There's such a huge responsibility when you are engaging in things that, at least by U.S. law, by Supreme Court decision, corporations have rights, and I believe that if you have rights, you also have responsibilities. And I'd like to see more corporate responsibility, frankly, in the world. So I'm loving hearing that there's an ethics board. I hope that such things are not just performatory, or that in fact they really are, real, live, functioning parts of corporate life.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. So going back to slippery slope, Seth, any
Yeah,
thoughts on the slippery slope of the possible outcomes of where America could go next, and what things we'll need to think about or be prepared for?
absolutely. So many. This is it's a very scary time for a lot of people, who, for example, are in a same-sex marriage within the United States right now, or who identify as LGBTQ IA plus, or people who, frankly, are just uncertain as to what's next. Because again, these are three precedents that were stated: Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell, by Justice Clarence Thomas in his decision regarding Roe v. Wade. And these do have some pretty sweeping implications on a huge number of levels, both the content, the specific content, so whether or not people can access birth control in various states. Again, most of these have to do with states' rights versus federal, which is its own kind of thing. Um, Slippery slope, we could just as easily maybe use the phrase, it's a dangerous precedent. And in fact, um, these are controversial laws that have been in the sights of activists for a very long time now, in many cases since they started. The Griswold case, which is the one regarding married couples being able to buy and use contraceptives without government restriction, that's literally all it was about. It was a Connecticut law that was overturned back in 1965. But the other two cases, the Lawrence v. Texas and Obergefell v. Hodges, these are more contemporary. One was 2003. The Obergefell case was probably the most controversial of the bunch, and that is the so-called gay marriage or same-sex marriage decision. That was only a handful of years ago. That was in 2015. Most of us still remember when that happened. Lawrence v. Texas, I think, of the bunch, is possibly one of the most disconcerting to me, although frankly the Griswold case is also concerning regarding contraception, because obviously from just a plain old logical standpoint, if you've got a state that says we're going to outlaw abortion, and in fact criminalize abortion, and we're also going to make it impossible for people to get safe, reliable birth control legally, we're going to see explosions in population, and frankly, social services are going to be overwhelmed, and we're going to see increased all kinds of problems. The president of the American Psychological Association just recently was quoted as saying, quote, "We're setting up a situation where we're deliberately pushing people into a psychological crisis." And this was both regarding the Roe v. Wade decision to overturn, but also some of these other cases that are now being kind of forced into the limelight. There's a lot of people who are sleeping less soundly as a result, because they're not sure whether or not they're going to be seen as a criminal because they engage in same sex sexual intercourse. That we're literally going to be potentially going back to criminalizing being gay in some states in the United States. And that's one of the three cases that a sitting Supreme Court justice threw out there as we should take another look at. That's the one that has me most personally concerned, because we're talking about huge numbers of people, and whether or not they choose to marry, people engaging in intimate relationships with people is something that we've been fairly good about for the last couple decades in the U.S., and that may be changing. That has me very concerned.
Yeah, and it raises, of course, the critical thinking question of, well, if the court thinks it's okay to take another look at these, what else might the court decide it's time to take another look at? And, certainly
Exactly.
people have raised questions like interracial marriage, which I think was only made legal in America in, was it the 50s?
Yeah,
1950s?
the Loving v. Virginia case, which I doubt very much we're going to see that overturned anytime soon, because we have that very same sitting Supreme Court justice who's in an interracial marriage. He's also a person of color, so overturning Brown v. Board of Education in the U.S., meaning that we'd be going back to segregation and segregated schools and so forth. I don't see those things happening, but frankly, at this point, I rule nothing out. I think
Right.
this particular court has made it clear that they're on a mission, and their mission is to engage a set of values that a handful of justices believe strongly about. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I have personal feelings on it, but again, from a critical thinking perspective, I just find it intriguing and worrisome, but intriguing. There's going to be a lot of potential things moving around within the United States in terms of law and culture and just the way our society functions, and things that happen in the U.S. typically have ripple effects around the world. So I'm very interested to see what's going to be going down. I think a lot of eyes will be on my country for a while.
Yeah, and another thing that I thought of, and I know we're running out of time, but I saw some social posts over the last few days from some people who are Jewish, and they were saying in Judaism, we don't define life as starting at conception. We define life as being born and the baby is viable and breathing. And
Right.
so are we just, is America just choosing one religion? Or even, I've been watching this guy on YouTube, not sponsored. There's a guy called Religion for Breakfast. I don't know if you've stumbled on him yet. I meant to mention him to you the other day. And basically, he's a PhD in religious studies with backgrounds in like archaeology and classical languages and things like that. And he takes critical thinking looks at religions. And
Yeah.
basically, one point that he makes over and over is that, you can't just say something is Christian or something is Catholic. He said, if you walk into a congregation or a church and there's 100 people sitting there, there's 100 different interpretations of that religion. That there's sub things within the religion. So we can't just say this is Christian versus everybody else or whatever. This is a subversion of someone's religion versus all different other interpretations. So in America, which claims to have religious freedom, how do you choose one religion's definition of something?
I'm just going to put a little asterisk by your word subversion, which could just as easily be a subversion of. So, yeah, we got to be careful, right? You put that in print, and immediately people are going to be like, "Do you think they're subverting the religion?"
Sub
Yes,
dash version.
right. So, just and I know we're sort of out of time, and this is a whole nother topic, but related to what you're talking about. And yet another Supreme Court uh, case, which is getting some press, not quite as much certainly as Roe v. Wade, but some press, is a seemingly off-topic discussion of whether or not prayer should be allowed in schools, because this case literally just hit, I believe, yesterday. And the decision was made that, in fact, this particular, I only know bits and pieces of the story, but I understand it was a sports school sports coach, football coach, who was praying with his team before the game, and he was dismissed from his position because of the American uh, sort of notion of separation of church and state, which goes back to the founding of our country. Um, and the Supreme Court decided ultimately that he was in the right, and that prayer in that context should be allowed in school. And I read an interesting thing just this morning saying you never hear people talking about private prayer being outlawed, because you can't actually outlaw it. What's
Right.
outlawed is not prayer, but evangelicism. It's public prayer in front of a microphone or in front of a group of people who are a captive audience. It's attempting to pray in a very public, very sort of open, vocal way, and it's almost exclusively American Christians who are engaged in this, and not all American Christians, but again, a very particular group of folks who are engaging in evangelical sort of religious interpretation. Um, so one thing that I've heard is that there's a number of people who are saying it's time for people to start praying to statues of Baphomet and reading from the Satanic Bible and engaging in Quranic prayer, and Jewish prayer in schools, and testing to see whether or not the Supreme Court is going to continue to agree that that's okay. The supposition being at this point that perhaps it will not be, because this is a group of people who identify as evangelical Christians, who are sitting on the Supreme Court right now. So it's complicated stuff. It's going to be an interesting time, to say the least. I am for one, fascinated by what's going to happen, and more than a little concerned, as I think most thinking people should be, because we just don't know how this is going to change things. But things are changing for sure. We're definitely in a time of transition right now.
Yeah, and I guess we'll look at wrapping up. Thanks to everybody for staying a little bit late. Again, I do want to repeat that this is not a typical topic for our channel. If you're joining us here on Delta CX, we are usually talking about CX and UX. And usually on Fridays, we are looking at social posts and articles that you've sent in for that are related to CX and UX for us to tear to pieces and think critically about. But with the things that are happening in America, I thought let's try something different just as an experiment. And maybe it's failed, but let's try something different and talk about some serious issues and how we can apply an attempt at unemotional, not taking sides, critical thinking, asking questions, asking concerned questions. So thank you to Seth for letting me rope him into this. And Seth, if anybody wants to track you down later, where can we find you?
Best way to reach me is on LinkedIn. I am Dr. Seth Finkel on LinkedIn.
That's true.
If after hearing us blabber on, you're interested in hearing more from me, that's the best way to connect. I don't post a lot on that particular platform, but that's the easiest way to find me. So, I am I'm hopeful that if nothing else, we've stirred up some thoughts for people, and we've given an example maybe of how critical thinking can work in practice. It's an area that's neither one of us are experts on, but both of us have a lot of thoughts and concerns about. It is possible to have an actual conversation with people without it devolving into, at best, debate, and at worst, a lot of angry vitriol. So hopefully you guys continue to engage this as the world moves forward.
Yeah, thanks again. So I'm going to play us out of here, but of course, I think we'll be here on Monday for the usual Think Out Loud show. But I don't have anything for the Think Out Loud show. So somebody send me something for the Think Out Loud show. You can find the link at deltacx.com/links. That's where I plan CX or UX research or do CX or UX design live to help teach you how I do it. So please send me something, otherwise the show is canceled. We've got a few comments coming in. Shree says, thank you both. Someone who goes by All That Yaz says, thank you, Dr. Seth and Debbie, for talking about this important topic. Thank you again, Seth. I'm going to play us out of here. Everybody have the best weekend you can, and we'll see y'all soon. Thanks.
Thanks so much for having me.
Bye. Customer centricity as business intelligence. Visit deltacx.com to learn why we are